Hi there everyone. This is my response to the task. Hi there. This is my response to task 3 from the Digital Literacy Practitioner Qualification. And the subject here is reflective practice in digital literacy teaching and learning. I'm going to talk about the purpose and benefits of reflective practice. I'm going to explain some of the barriers and challenges to using reflective practice. I'm going to identify 2 methods and 2 models of reflective practice and then justify my selection of one of those models. I'm going to talk about the components of my digital reflective practice record and then explain a little bit more detail about a recent reflective process I went through in improving one of my sessions that I've delivered regularly. So I'm going to start by looking at the purpose and benefits of reflective practice and begin by giving a definition of reflection. So reflection is defined by Bode, Keogh and Walker, 1985, and this is quoted in Manthorpe and Baginski, 2015. The source is at the bottom of the page here. Reflection is defined as an important human activity in which people recapture their experience, think about it, mull over, and evaluate it. It is this working with experience that is important in learning. And hopefully that'll be reflected through what I discuss in terms of the models and methods that are described later in this video. So what can reflection do? What's the purpose? My overall purpose of reflection is to improve self-confidence when we recognise the things that we've done well. It helps us to understand why things haven't gone so well, and that's crucial to making continual improvements, and it pushes us to continually improve the plans and preparations we make when delivering digital literacy, as well as the delivery itself. So reflection isn't always easy, and there are several barriers and challenges to the use of reflective practice. And these can be classified as internal or personal barriers and external or environmental barriers or challenges. So the internal personal barriers are all linked to the fact that some people find introspection difficult. This may be because of socioeconomic or cultural differences. More excluded groups, often their members lack self-confidence, and also some cultures, people from many different backgrounds and cultures find the idea of self-criticism and self-reflection difficult because of some established cultural practices. This can be linked to exposing one's weakness, and that is inherently risky and emotionally demanding. There's a tendency when people do reflect, when people do examine themselves, to focus primarily on the negatives rather than reflecting holistically and encompassing the things that they do well and recognizing the things that they do well. There's a general there's a general level of self-confidence needed to reflect effectively, and that's what I'm saying overall here. But also, people aren't able to reflect internally if they don't have knowledge or exposure of and to the alternatives that are available to them. If you don't have a wider view on what you're doing, if you aren't exposed to alternatives, then it's very difficult to see where you may be going wrong. External or environmental factors, though, are usually considered the most significant when it comes to barriers to reflection. Many tutor contracts, particularly in adult education in Wales, do not pay for time outside of direct delivery, or may not pay for time outside direct delivery, which may reduce the extrinsic motivation of tutors to conduct reflective practice. If it's part of your professional role but you're not being paid to do it, that can reduce the extrinsic or the environmental motivations. This is linked to an overall lack of time for reflection, a lack of formal structured supervision that could prompt reflective practice and drive it, and the competing demands preventing the implementation of new plans that may come from reflection. So the value of reflection can be reduced by the inability or the perceived inability due to competing demands of being able to implement any changes that you reflect that are needed. Linked to this is that curriculum or assessment constraints and traditional means of and modes and methods of delivery and assessment can mean that any reflections are not able to be implemented in the classroom. It may be out of the tutor's hands, and therefore if the reflections, if the improvements that are reflected upon aren't able to be implemented because of assessment or curriculum and constraints and the expected mode of delivery, this can reduce motivation to reflect. Tutors may not be aware of or able to access training and development opportunities that will improve their knowledge about alternative models, modes, techniques to implement in the classroom, and that would again, this is linked to the factor in the internal classification about the ability of someone to reflect in the knowledge that there are alternatives out there. Overall, resource limits, such as the lack of access to better equipment, better connectivity, or better venues, may mean improvements to practice identified in reflection are impossible to implement. And again, this may reduce the motivation and may provide a challenge for reflection when we're looking at what is possible, where we may improve. We may have all of the knowledge, we may be able to plan for it, but if the resources aren't there, we may not be able to implement it. So there's a very interesting piece by Margaret Davis called Barriers to Reflective Practice, which looked at this within the context of higher education in the early 2000s. It's an arena that I'm aware of because I was teaching in higher education, just beginning my teaching career in higher education at the time that this article was written. And it makes the point that time is not the only thing that is required before reflective learning can and will take place. It does play a significant part in the debate, but it's suggested, however, that the following are also required. A commitment to staff by policymakers and management alike. This goes back to my extrinsic factor around the resources in terms of the pay and the access to supervision processes, etc., that staff may have. The recognition, and this is important, that staff cannot be all things to all people, that we have courses that need to be delivered, and it may not, when we reflect, we may discover that some of our learners could have been better accommodated for, their learning styles, their learning preferences, taken account of more fully. But it still comes back to the fact that if we're planning sessions and we need to deliver things, that because it's our job, that staff can't be all things to all people, and that reflection can only take us so far. A revisiting of management styles. Again, this is linked to the support offered to educators to be able to do reflective practice, and also the allowing of time and the integrating reflection completely into all aspects of the organisation's way of working and their internal processes. It does require, and this is the intrinsic or internal personal aspect, which is it requires commitment by staff to their own development, and that can't be discounted. The provision of appropriate resources, though, in this article was seen as being prior to all of the above. That without the resources that allow us to reflect in terms of time, money, etc., and the resources to allow us to implement the changes that come from reflection, this could provide the overall context for the barriers. But in general as well, Davis suggested that there needs to be a wider understanding of reflective teaching and the benefits of it, and that, I guess, is the purpose of what I'm doing here. So, what models and methods of reflective practice are out there? So first of all, I'm going to look at some common methods that people use to reflect, and then try and think about the models that frame those. So the methods, formal methods of reflection, are reflective practice logs in either written, handwritten or electronic form. Often these use structured pro formas, which may even be issued by the organisation that you work for, and there are also reflective pro formas that are available online. I'm going to show one of those later as well. For a formal method would be for these logs, these pro formas, to be reviewed with a mentor, supervisor, or line manager in a formal meeting situation, or electronically. Often these formal methods are mandatory for the job or for professional registration, for example, with the Education Workforce Council. Informal methods, and these are more common, ones I have more experience with myself, are personal self-reflection, thinking to oneself about what's happened, going over it in one's mind, and identifying areas that went well and where you could improve. This is often aided by debriefing with colleagues, having a chat over coffee, for instance, with a colleague, with a trusted colleague, where you can be honest and open about what went wrong, and you can learn from one another and share ideas for improvements. But if you don't have a colleague on hand, I always find it beneficial to discuss my work informally with my friends and family, and tell people what I've been doing, and explain it to them, and to think, to get their perspectives on the work that I'm doing, because often I'm working with public service workers. A lot of my friends and family themselves are public service workers, so getting their perspective on the kinds of learning opportunities that I offer from them is a really important reflection process for myself. And then more free-form methods of reflection, the keeping of a personal diary, maintaining a blog about your practice, and there are many good ones of these out there, and including video blogs, so vlogs, and this is the form that I've decided to do some of my informal reflection for this course. I have a blog site to which I'm uploading videos of me reflecting upon different aspects of my practice and this course. So if we move to look at the models of reflective practice, probably the most common or well known of these is the reflective element in Kolb's experiential learning theory, ELT. And the source for my knowledge here is shown on the screen. So this process begins with people having concrete experiences, CE, in this model, and then taking part in reflective observation of their experience. This can be done on your own or with others, and that's called RO. The next stage in this theory, in this process, is abstract conceptualization. So that's taking our experiences and our reflective observations and putting those into some sort of theoretical context, and creating new ideas from that. And with those ideas, with those theoretical insights, we can then actively experiment regarding improvements that we may wish to make. We actively experiment with them and use them to complete the cycle and move back to conducting concrete experiences. Now, this isn't just a cycle. It's possible to move between reflective observation and active experimentation without going in too much detail about theoretical and abstract conceptualization, and vice versa. This is a very general theory. The second model that I'm going to look at is Gibbs' reflective cycle, which is much more focused upon reflection itself as a discrete process. So the first element, well, it has 6 elements, which are describe, feelings, evaluation, analysis, conclusion, and action. And this is a true cycle. So the first element is to describe what went on. The second is to think about our thoughts and feelings about what went on. The third is to evaluate what went on, what went well, what didn't. The fourth element, sometimes combined with evaluation, but I see it as distinct, is to look based upon our previous experience and our research into alternatives, what is to analyze this, how we can analyze the experience and what went on. Then what conclusions can we draw from it, and what actions can we take to improve it. And that's why I do like this model. And so in my reflective practice, I have selected Gibbs' model of reflective practice. So why Gibb? I've given a hint at some of the reasons then, but it is purely really for me because this is focused on reflection as a discrete process. It gives more substance, I guess, to the RO element of Kolb's experiential learning process, but for me gives a much clearer structure. It asks important questions of the reflector. It's a Socratic method in its essence. Socratic questioning being about encouraging someone to examine their own life, their own practice, their own behaviours, their own thoughts, their own feelings, and all of which are encapsulated in Gibb. I find it a highly emotionally intelligent method. It also involves features of formal and informal reflection, In particular, its use of thoughts and feelings is really important, and are things that usually come out more in the informal methods than formal methods, but it does formalize that, particularly the production of action plans. As I said, it promotes emotional intelligence, but importantly, it promotes learning. It promotes and prompts people to go out and look and think about what could have been done differently. I think it's adaptable to a range of situations as well. This is a model that can be taken up by practitioners, not just in education, but in all sorts of different professions and situations. And I like the fact that it automatically creates a plan of action. And I'll show you a little bit more about that when we look now at the components of digital reflective practice records. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are proformas out there online that can be used by practitioners to conduct reflective practice. This here is on the screen is one from CPD.me, which you can go to cpdme.com and find that, and you can print it out and use it as your reflective practice record. And this uses Gibbs' model to a large extent. It asks very simple questions: describe what happened, describe what you were thinking and feeling, evaluate what was good and bad about the experience, analyze what sense you can make of the situation, conclude about what else you could have done, and then plan actions. What would you do in future to improve what happened? So that is clearly explicitly linked to the 6 elements of the Gibbs cycle. Now, when I looked at creating my own digital reflective practice record, I took the CPD.me model and my readings about Gibb and some of my own experience, and built my own Google form, which asks me to reflect in a very kind of conversational way on my own practice. But what it starts with is asking me to look back to the 6th stage of my last reflective process, and asked me to describe what actions I've taken or changes I've made since my last reflection, and gives me a quick link into the spreadsheet that sits behind this Google form. It asked me to name my reflection, which I think is an important addition, and to identify when the activity happened. And I've tried to keep it as generic as possible. So then the form moves me on to stage 1, which is the descriptive element. So I'm asked to describe what happened, but I've added in here, I've asked myself to list the tools, technologies, and techniques that were being used in the situation. So this is very much linked to my digital literacy practice. The 2nd stage asks me to think simply about what I was thinking and feeling at the time. And the 3rd stage asks me and separates out about the good and the bad aspects of the activity or experience that I'm reflecting upon. I've purposefully prompted myself to consider what went well first, and this again is linked to the idea that one of the barriers to reflective practice is the tendency to focus upon the negatives. The 4th stage, the analysis stage, I've separated out from that evaluation stage, because I think it's vitally important that we look at taking a step back from the what went good and what went bad, and looking at a really important question, which is why. and maybe I'll add why actually as an explanatory note on this in this section. But it also prompts me to learn. So it asks me to identify any sources or examples out there that could help me to explain what had happened, and this includes my own experience, but also looking at some of the latest research or theory in this area of practice. Again, this goes back to the barrier of you not being able to reflect or use reflection effectively, or build from it in particular, if you don't have the knowledge of what alternatives are already out there. The fifth stage, conclusion. I've asked myself to look at what else I could have done, but I've also added to that what skills may I develop that would help me to cope with it better next time. And I think that's important to separate out. That again, it's prompting me to learn. The sixth and final stage of this is action. So it's asking me what I'm going to do differently next time, and this is where it performs a function, this form, in creating the basis of a personal action plan. So it asked me what I would do differently next time. If the situation was to arise again, what actions would I take? Are there changes that I need to make to my practice more generally? And then it links it back to the tools, technologies, and techniques, and what improvements I could make there. So I'm a reflective practitioner in my own work. I'm not always great at the formal side of it, but I do the informal side as a matter of course, and I think now I have a greater knowledge of Gibbs model, and I have that structure. It'll be much easier for me to do it. So I'm going to talk about two of the improvements that I've made as a result of reflective practice in some of my digital literacy sessions over the last month or so. So I've recently been delivering a course called Combating Cyber Violence and Online Bullying. It's a highly digitally enhanced session that uses Open Badge Academy as a digital workbook, and I may talk about that more in future submissions for this course. Combating Cyber Violence and Online Bullying it's an accredited course. It's a level 1 credit Agora Cymru lifelong learning unit, and I built this course around that unit, and with the help and the design input of Unison Cymru Wales and Adult Learning Wales, when I was running my previous DigiSkills Cymru project. But recently I was asked by Unison's Connecting Learners project to deliver this course in Aberystwyth, but before that I was asked to do it in Llantrisant in South Wales in a hospital, and this task on the screen here, the learner task to identify 3 sources of help and support for those affected by online bullying, it was task 3 on the course. And the method that I had previously used, there's a link to my reflective log where there are entries about going into detail. You can see my reflections. So the original way that people were asked to conduct this task was to go onto the learner iPads that I supplied, and to use Google Docs app on there to record 3 different sources of help and support that they had found during a discovery learning task. So the learners were given half an hour to go off onto the internet and find authoritative sources of help and support. and then enter them on a shared document. Each team member from their group within the class would enter at least 3 sources onto a shared Google Doc form. And then the link to this form would be uploaded as evidence of their achievement to their digital workbook on Open Badge Academy. And that would be used for accreditation. So this was the Google Doc pro forma, and when I was in the classroom with my learners in Llantrisant in the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, we got to this task, and then I discovered that I had neglected to check that the iPads that I'd collected from another tutor the evening before had Google Docs app installed upon them. I had assumed wrongly that this would still be available after my having previously used these machines many months ago, but the app wasn't on there. The network in the venue wasn't able to allow us to download the app quickly onto each device, so I had to come up with an alternative way of the learners capturing and recording this information. So I had to think on my feet, and what I did was very quickly create a PDF version of that form that would still allow the person to identify themselves, and they could still complete the task, still using their iPads to go and discover these sources of help and support. I emailed the PDF to the training administrator in the hospital, who very kindly printed out a copy for each of the learners. They completed this form, just adding 3 themselves, and then took a photograph of their form and uploaded that photograph as evidence for task 3 in their digital workbook, which allowed them to demonstrate that they'd done the work. That allowed them to fulfill and succeed against the criteria for the unit. So that was a solution on the day, but it wasn't ideal. It also made me think and reflect upon previous experiences with that task, which had never quite been right since we initially designed the course and delivered it just over a year ago. And so I thought again about how this could be done. What tools could we use that would allow that would take away the need for people to sign in, would take away the need for people to have a specific app on their device beyond a web browser. So we needed something browser-based, something that people didn't need to sign in on, but something that would still maintain the kind of the collaborative and the digital element, the digital working, digital productivity element of this course. So the solution that I came up with was to use a Google form, again, in the same way that I have for my reflective practice log. And this asks the learners who navigate to the form just using a short URL. It asks them to name the source of support, identify who it's for, how it can help, and how people can access it, and do this 3 times and then submit their form. So this worked really well. People could access it. It allowed everyone on the second delivery of the course a week later in Aberystwyth in Ceredigion Young Council, allowed the staff who I was training there to complete this task reasonably quickly and easily. But it did present its own issues. Those issues were that the learners were using their iPads to research the sources of help and support, and they were using their Safari browser or Google Chrome browser to do so. But the form was also browser-based. So one of the learners had an issue where she started to complete the Google form. She entered resource number 1 that she'd found, and then accidentally navigated away from the form. Now, unlike Google Docs, Google Forms doesn't save what you're doing as you're going along. There may well, my reflection is that there may well be a need for me to demonstrate the use of tabs within browsers. It gives an opportunity to develop that aspect of the learner's digital literacy and their knowledge about and skills with digital technology, and so that's really important. This also still has the barrier of people having to type on an iPad, which is not always easy, especially if people are not familiar with using iOS, with using the keyboard. It can be challenging. So there are further reflections and possible changes that I need to make to the delivery of this aspect of that course. And without going through a reflective process, without constantly wishing to improve the learner experience and improve my own practice, I wouldn't have been able to make these changes. So that's reflective practice in digital literacy, teaching and learning. I hope you found this video informative. Diolch yn fawr iawn, and I'll see you again soon.